Welcome back. We have a brand new story for you today. Nina was already at the bus terminal with her suitcase when her husband called, demanding she cancel her trip immediately. Obedient as always, she walked up to the ticket counter to ask for a refund. But then, she heard the impossible. Someone had already boarded the bus using her exact ticket. Nina felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We hope you enjoy today's story. Nina sat in the kitchen, watching the sky slowly brighten through the window. It was 5:00 a.m. On the table sat a mug of cold coffee. Next to it was a sturdy cardboard portfolio, secured with a rubber band. Inside were her best sketches, 12 pages, carefully selected over 3 nights from a hidden pile on top of the closet. Tucked safely, behind a box of winter boots, Robert never snooped up there. He had no interest in anything above his eye level, unless it had to do with money or control. Her suitcase was in the hallway. It was a small, wheeled carry-on she had bought before they even got married. Nina had packed it the day before while Robert was at work. 2 blouses, a pair of jeans, a skirt, underwear, a toiletry bay, and her phone charger. Everything fit so easily that it actually scared her a little. 15 years of marriage, and her suitcase was less full than it would be for a weekend getaway. She stood up, poured the coffee down the drain, and rinsed the mug. It was pure a bit. Robert couldn't stand dirty dishes. He couldn't stand it when the hand towel hung crooked. He couldn't stand it when Nina talked on the phone with a friend for more than 10 minutes. "You've been on the phone for an hour," he would say. "Don't you have anything else to do?" Nina did have things to do, but Robert never considered any of them to be real. He called her drawing nonsense. Not out of malice, as he explained it, but out of honesty. "Nina, try to understand me," he would say. "I don't want to hurt your feelings, but tell me, who is this for? Have you seen what people actually buy? Have you seen the artists in galleries? That's a whole different level. And you, these little watercolor flowers. Who's going to pay real money for that?" He said all of this in a calm voice. He never yelled. Sometimes, he would even stroke her hand. And that was what made it so much worse. Because if someone yells, you can get mad. But when someone speaks calmly, with the gentle tone of a caring doctor, you start to think maybe he's right. Nina had thought he was right for years. She only drew at night. When Robert fell asleep on the couch in front of the TV, she would go to the kitchen, turn on the small desk lamp, take out her pencils, and work until her eyes couldn't stay open. She drew the backyards of her neighborhood, the fire escapes of old brick apartment buildings, the tired faces of people on the subway, the cats sitting on windowsills, the wrinkled hands of elderly women at the farmer's market, and every single page she hid. Every time she slipped a drawing into her portfolio, she felt like she was hiding stolen goods. Alms. Robert found a sketch. Nina had accidentally left it on the counter behind the curtain. It was a drawing of an older woman selling fresh herbs near the subway entrance. It was highly detailed. The face, the deep wrinkles, the fingers gripping the bundle of mint, the stubborn, piercing look in her eyes. "What's this?" Robert asked, holding the paper with 2 fingers, like someone holding a stranger's receipt. "My drawing," Nina said. "What for?" "For nothing." Robert flipped the page over, scoffed, and tossed it on the table. "Nina, you're 43 years old. Isn't it time to stop? Go take an accounting course. At least that will be good for something." Nina quietly put the drawing away. She never left anything out in the open again. But the strangest thing happened about 6 months after that conversation. Nina accidentally saw an email on his open laptop, addressed to a woman named Sylvia. Robert had gone to the bathroom, leaving the computer awake on the kitchen table. Attached to the email was a photo of her sketch, the exact same one, the older lady with the herbs. The caption read, "Another idea. Take a look. This could work for the poster series. We'll discuss the price." Nina read it and closed the laptop lid. Her hands were shaking. She had no idea what to do with this information. So, she did what she always did. Nothing. 3 years passed. And nothing changed. Actually, one thing did change. Nina stopped crying. She used to cry all the time. At night in the bathroom. Or sometimes just standing by the window after Robert left for work. But eventually, her tears dried up. Not because things got easier, but because something inside her hardened, like clay left out in the sun, too long fragile, but rigid. It was in this numb state that she stumbled upon an ad for an art residency. 3 months in another city. A privat studio. Housing. And a small grant. Selection required a portfolio and an in-person interview. Nina read the requirements 4 times. She closed the webpage. She opened it again. Finally, she filled out the application and attached 6 scanned sketches. Her heart pounded as if she were running across a busy highway. The response arrived 3 weeks later. Dear Nina Anderson, we are thrilled to inform you that your application has passed the initial selection process. We would like to invite you for an in-person interview. Below that was the date, the address, and a list of required documents. Nina reread the email standing in the hallway, gripping her phone with both hands. She quickly closed the app and double-checked everything. Robert couldn't have seen the notification. She had turned off lock screen alerts a year ago. But she had forgotten something. Robert had set up her email account for her years ago, just to make things easier for you, he had said at the time. He created a shared account and linked a copy of it to his own phone. Nina had long forgotten about this. But Robert hadn't. He read everything. He didn't show any signs of knowing. He didn't ask a single question. But that night at dinner, he was unusually sweet. He served her salad. He refilled her water glass. He even asked how her day went. Nina immediately went on high alert. Robert's kindness was never just kindness. There was always a motive. Over the next few days, he watched her. He saw Nina pulling her sketch pads from the top of the closet. He saw her flipping through her drawings. He noticed her sitting over her portfolio late at night, refining lines with a pencil. He never said a word. He just watched her from the doorway, smiling in a way that made Nina's stomach turn. Robert had figured it all out. If Nina went to the residency, she would have a studio, time, and silence. She wouldn't draw in secret at 2:00 a.m. anymore. She would draw openly, surrounded by people who would tell her the one thing he never did, that she was talented. If her work was ever exhibited publicly, someone would inevitably recognize the sketches he had been secretly passing off to Sylvia. The questions, the comparisons, the coincidences, his entire quiet little scheme would crumble. He decided to act, but not by forbidding her. If he outright forbade her, Nina might argue back. She might storm out and slam the door. Robert wanted something else. He wanted the residency itself to reject Nina. He wanted her to come back home shattered, believing she had lost her chance because of her own incompetence. That way, she would stay with him forever. On the day of the trip, Nina woke up before her alarm. Robert was still asleep, or at least pretending to be. She got dressed, grabbed her suitcase, her portfolio, and her folder of documents. She slipped silently out of the apartment. The hallway smelled like damp carpet and somebody frying bacon. Outside, the air was crisp. It was a gray morning. The first few buses were passing by, and the benches outside her building were completely empty. Nina called a cab and gave the driver the address of the bus terminal. The terminal was already buzzing. Early morning commuters, elderly folks pulling luggage carts, students with heavy backpacks, and tired families. Nina walked over to the electronic departure board. She found her bus and confirmed the time. Boarding would begin in 20 minutes. She sat on a metal bench near gate 3 and placed her suitcase between her legs. She held the cardboard portfolio on her lap, gripping it with both hands like a newborn baby. With exactly 10 minutes left before the boarding announcement, her phone rang. Robert's name flashed on the screen. Nina stared at the name, then at the departure board. Then back at the phone, she answered. Nina. Where are you? His voice wasn't angry. It was worse. It was pitiful. Broken. Filled with heavy pauses. As if he were struggling to breathe. I'm at the terminal. I told you. I have a trip. Nina. Please listen to me. I feel terrible. Really bad. Since this morning. My blood pressure is all over the place. My head is pounding. I can't even stand up. I need you home. Robert. Call an ambulance. I don't need an ambulance. I need you. You're my wife. Do you even care about me anymore? A heavy pause. Nina stared at the screen where her bus number was blinking. Nina. Please come home. I feel awful, seriously. Grab a cab and come back right now. I need you by my side. I can't be alone right now. You know I can't be alone. He spoke softer and softer. Nina recognized that tone. It was the exact pitch that always worked. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't an ultimatum. It was that low, trembling voice. I can't make it without you. As if he would literally collapse without her. As if she were the only pillar keeping his life standing. And every time, Nina felt that if she walked away, he would fall. And it would be entirely her fault. Nina stood up. Her suitcase rolled slightly across the floor. She began walking toward the refund desk. Her phone still pressed to her ear. Listening to Robert repeat his script. Thank you. Baby. Thank you so much. You know I'm nothing without you. The line at the ticket counter was short, just 2 people ahead of her. Nina stood in third place. Dropped her phone into her purse. And pulled out her driver's license. Her hands were shaking slightly, not from the cold, but because something deep inside was pulling her back toward the gate, back to the bus, back to the 12 sketches in her portfolio. But the habit of obedience was stronger. It was her turn. Behind the glass sat a woman in her 50s. Wearing glasses on a beaded chain. In front of her was a plastic coffee cup and a worn-out notebook. Ticket refund. Please, Nina said. She slid her ID under the glass along with her phone, which displayed her digital ticket. The agent took the ID, scanned the screen, typed something, frowned, and typed again. She slightly turned the monitor and looked at Nina over her glasses. Mom, this ticket has already been used for boarding. What? The ticket was scanned. The passenger is listed as boarded. I can't issue a refund. Nina blinked. She looked at her phone. Then at Hair ID. Then back at the agent. Wait. What do you mean scanned? I'm standing right here. This is my ID. I haven't boarded anything. The agent shrugged. I'm just telling you what the system shows. Ticket used. Boarding registered 20 minutes ago. It's a mistake. Please check again. The agent checked. Then she checked one more time. The result didn't change. The barcode had been scanned. The passenger was on the bus. The refund was blocked. Nina stepped away from the counter and immediately called customer service. She listened to hold music for 4 minutes. Finally, she explained the situation to a representative. The rep asked for her ticket number, her ID number, the date, and the route. Then, there was a long silence. According to our records, the boarding process for this ticket went through normally. The voice said, the ticket was scanned, and the passenger is on board. But I'm not on board. I'm standing in the terminal. We can log a formal complaint and forward it to the relevant department. Nina didn't wait for her to finish. She broke into a run toward the boarding gates, weaving through people, bags, and crying children. Her heels echoed sharply against the concrete. She reached gate 3 and stared at the empty space where her bus had been parked. The bus had left 4 minutes ago. Nina stood on the edge of the curb and looked out toward the exit, watching where the heavy vehicles disappeared around the corner. She hugged her portfolio tightly to her chest. Her suitcase was still sitting back near the ticket counter. A cold breeze swept through the open terminal, carrying the smell of diesel exhaust and wet asphalt. Slowly, she walked back to her bench. She sat down, placed her portfolio beside her, grabbed her phone, and looked at the screen. No new messages from Robert. No missed calls. No. Are you on your way back? Silence. A very familiar silence. Robert always went completely quiet the second he got what he wanted. And then? Nina understood. It didn't hit her all at once like a punch. It rose up slowly. Like dark water filling a room. Someone had boarded the bus with her ticket. Someone had her exact QR code. Someone walked past that gate in her place. And it couldn't have been a random stranger. To pull that off, you needed the bus number, the seat assignment, and the digital ticket itself. All of that was in her email. The very same email Robert had linked to his own phone, just to make things easier for her. Nina sat on the metal bench, gripping her phone so tightly, her knuckles turned white. A woman walked by holding a toddler. The kid was eating an ice cream cone, dripping it all over the floor. Somewhere overhead, a speaker announced another arrival. Pigeons were fighting over a stale crust of bread under the bench next to her. She didn't call Robert. For the first time in 15 years. She didn't dial his number to ask what was going on. She didn't ask for an explanation. She didn't give him another chance to turn the whole situation upside down, because she knew exactly what would happen. If she called, he would say something that would make her doubt her own sanity. He would say it was a coincidence. He would say the terminal system glitched. He would say it was her own fault for not getting to the gate on time. And, as always, she would believe him. Nina stood up, grabbed her suitcase, and walked right back to the ticket counters. But this time, she got in the sales line. I need the next ticket to the exact same destination, she said, naming the city. Next departure is in 2 hours and 10 minutes. The agent replied, standard or first class. I don't care, just get me on it. She bought the ticket, walked back to her bench, and waited. The portfolio rested on her lap. 12 sketches. The old lady with the fresh herbs, the backyard with the clotheslines, the cat on the windowsill, the kid with the bike near the garages, the woman looking out a fifth-floor window, everything she had drawn in secret. In the dead of night. As if she were doing something illegal. Nina ran her finger along the edge of the cardboard. Whoever sat on that bus in my place is heading to the city where they're waiting for me. They have my ticket. They probably have my name. But they don't have these 12 pages. They don't have the only thing that is truly mine. Those 2 hours stretched out like an entire day. Nina sat perfectly still. Here, portfolio, in her lap. Her eyes fixed on the digital departure board as the bus routes rotated on the screen. Every now and then, she glanced at her phone. Robert didn't call. He didn't send a single text. Not one message in 2 hours. The man who, just moments ago, I was so violently ill he begged his wife to drop everything and rush home, had apparently experienced a miraculous recovery. Or, he was never sick to begin with. Nina walked into the terminal's food court. She bought a coffee in a paper cup and a warm breakfast sandwich. The coffee was bitter. The sandwich was bland. She stood near a high-top table, alone, looking like someone who had nowhere to go and nowhere to run. Nearby, a guy in a heavy work jacket was drinking coffee from the exact same type of cup, scrolling on his phone. Behind him, an older lady in a cardigan was unwrapping a foil breakfast burrito, eating carefully with one hand cupped underneath to catch the crumbs. It was the ordinary life of a bus terminal. Everyone was going somewhere, totally absorbed in their own stories. Nina stood among them, finally trying to understand her own. She thought about how she had always played the same role. Robert talked. She listened. Robert pushed. She yielded. Robert cried. She stayed. Ons. 3 years ago. She had almost left. She packed a bag, called a cab, and made it to her best friend's house. Robert found her 2 hours later. He showed up at the front door holding a bouquet of flowers. He called. He texted. And finally, he marched up and rang the doorbell. Her friend opened the door and sighed. Nina. He's out here. It's up to you. Nina walked out into the hallway. Robert was standing there with wet, red eyes, holding a tiny velvet box in his hands. Nina. Marry me again. Please. I'm nothing without you. I'm going to change everything. He did it right in front of her friend. Right in front of her friend's husband. Right in front of their little daughter peeking out from a bedroom door. Nina couldn't say no with an audience watching. Not because she wanted to go back, but because rejecting a crying man on his knees, holding a ring while strangers stare at you. I felt like pure cruelty. She went back, and the next 3 years were exactly the same as the 12 before them. But now, standing in a brightly lit food court with a cold coffee in her hand, Nina realized something very simple. If she called Robert and asked him who boarded that bus in her place, he would never admit it. He would say, "What are you talking about? What bus? You missed the bus because you didn't get there on time." Like always. Nina, you leave everything to the last minute. And after 5 minutes on the phone, Nina wouldn't know what was real and what was in her head. It was always like that. Robert could spin any situation so that she became the villain. That was why she didn't call. She finished her coffee, tossed the cup in the trash, walked to her gate, and waited. Her bus was standard economy. She had a window seat. Nina placed her suitcase in the overhead bin, sat down, and kept her portfolio resting against her leg. Across the aisle, an older woman settled in. She immediately pulled a ball of gray yarn and some knitting needles out of her tote bag and went to work, paying no attention to anyone around her. In the row behind Nina, someone fell asleep almost instantly, their face pressed against the glass. Nina rested her temple against the window. Outside, the city slowly faded into gas stations and warehouses. Then, the landscape opened up to farm fields, silos, and long stretches of highway. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine what was happening at the other end of the route. The woman who took her ticket was already on her way. In a few hours, she would arrive in the city where the art center was located. What was she going to do? Why was she even going? Nina ran through the possibilities, but they all pointed to one unavoidable truth. Only Robert knew about the residency. Only Robert had access to her email. Only Robert desperately needed Nina to miss that interview. An hour into the ride, Nina opened the portfolio and pulled out the top sketch, resting it on her lap. It was a watercolor of an old backyard with clotheslines stretching across the frame. Between the hanging white sheets, the face of a little girl peeked out, as if hiding behind a theater curtain. Nina smoothed the edge of the paper and stared at the details she had drawn completely from memory. The crack in the brick wall, the rusted hook, the shadow of the oak tree spilling across the concrete. "Is that yours?" Nina looked up. Standing in the aisle was a man in his 40s. He wore a wrinkled linen shirt and had a canvas backpack slung over one shoulder. He was looking down at her sketch, tilting his head slightly, like a man who just walked past a gallery window and couldn't help but stop. "Yes," Nina said, instinctively covering the paper with her hand. "Sorry. I didn't mean to intrude," he said. "I was just walking back from the restroom and caught a glimpse." "That is a very vibrant drawing." Nina stayed quiet. The man nodded, offering an apologetic smile, and continued down the aisle. But a few minutes later, he came back. He was holding 2 cups of coffee from the onboard service. He gently set one down on Nina's folding tray table. "Truce," he said with a soft smile. "I know I bothered you, but coffee is the international symbol of peace." Nina looked at the cup, then up at him. "Thank you. You didn't have to." He sat down in the empty aisle seat across from her. The older lady knitting briefly glanced up, then went right back to her yarn. "I'm Andrew." He introduced himself. "And look, I didn't stop just to be annoying. I work with artists, curating exhibitions, residencies, portfolio selections. Occupationnel hazard. I guess. I see a piece of art like that, and I literally can't walk past it." Nina studied him for a second. Wrinkled linen shirt, worn-out sneakers, A backpack with a keychain shaped like a paintbrush, large hands with a faint ink stain on the index finger. He didn't look like a guy trying to hit on a stranger out of boredom. He looked like someone who worked with his hands and who respected people who worked with theirs. "I'm heading to an interview," Nina said. She didn't even know why she said it. Maybe because in her 2 hours at the terminal and 1 hour on the bus, the only words she had spoken were, refund, please, and next ticket. "For a residency?" Andrew asked. Nina nodded. "Which one? If it's not a secret." She told him the name. She watched Andrew's face instantly shift. "Not a lot." But his eyebrows pulled together. And he gripped his coffee cup a little tighter. "That's my residency," he said slowly. "I'm one of the curators. I'm heading back there right now from a work trip." Nina opened her mouth, then closed it. Then she opened it again. "Are you joking?" "No. It's an absurd coincidence. I know. But I'm literally on my way to the final selection. We have 3 candidates coming in today. And apparently, you're one of them." A cold shiver ran down Nina's spine. Not out of joy, but because the coincidence was just too perfect, too incredibly timed. And she had long ago learned to distrust anything that looked like good luck. "Andrew," she said slowly, "I have a problem. I was supposed to be on the first bus this morning, but someone boarded using my ticket. I couldn't get a refund. And I couldn't get on the bus. It left without me. I had to buy a ticket for this one." She reached into her purse, pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, the refund denial receipt the agent had printed for her, and handed it to him. Andrew took it. "Read it." Read it a second time. And looked at Nina. "So, someone used your digital ticket to get on the earlier bus?" "Yes." "Why?" Nina stayed quiet. How was she supposed to explain this to a total stranger? "How do you say?" "My husband probably stole my QR code and hired an imposter to take my place so I wouldn't ruin his secret side hustle." It sounded insane. It sounded exactly like the kind of hysterical paranoia Robert would accuse her of having. "I think it was my husband," Nina said quietly, turning to look out the window. Outside, miles of cornfields and pine trees blurred past. "He didn't want me to go. He called me at the terminal and begged me to come home. When I went to cancel the ticket, it had already been scanned. Someone took my place." Andrew leaned back and rubbed his chin. "Nina, this is serious. If someone boarded with your ticket and is heading to our city, they might show up at the residency claiming to be you." "I know." Andrew pulled out his phone. "Hold on. I'm calling my team." He walked toward the back of the bus where it was quieter. Nina sat alone, listening to the hum of the engine, the click-clack of the knitting needles across the aisle, and the soft snoring from the row behind her. Her coffee was getting cold. Outside, a light gray drizzle began to fall, turning the landscape into a washed-out watercolor painting. Andrew came back 15 minutes later. His face was entirely different. Tense, focused, like a man who just heard something deeply disturbing. "Nina," he said, sitting back down across the aisle, "a woman claiming to be you is already at the center." Nina froze. She got there early. She showed the digital invite on her phone. She didn't have an ID, claimed she left her wallet at home, and she brought a portfolio. "My colleague said the work is incredibly weak, way below the standard of what was submitted in your application." Nina clutched her cardboard folder. What did she tell them? She claimed the application sketches were sent by mistake, said they belonged to a friend, and that her real work was what she brought in today. Then, she asked to withdraw her application. Andrew paused, watching Nina's eyes. She asked for a formal withdrawal form, claimed she changed her mind, had family problems, and didn't want to waste anyone's time. Nina sat perfectly still. She looked at Andrew, at his hands, at the faint ink stain on his finger. She felt something rising inside her chest, something massive. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was something heavy, taking up all the space from her stomach to her throat. Robert hadn't just sent this woman to sabotage her trip, he sent her to live her life for the day, to sit in her seat, arrive in her city, walk into her residency, and present mediocre garbage so the directors would think, wow, this Nina is just a hack. And then, she was supposed to sign a withdrawal form to slam the door shut forever, so that when the real Nina finally called in a panic, they would say, "But you came here yourself. You signed the paperwork. We're done here." He didn't steal her money. He didn't lock her in a closet. He stole her identity. He swapped her out for an understudy. As if Nina wasn't a living, breathing woman, but just a role any cheap actress could play. "Andrew," she said, her voice eerily calm, though her hands were shaking, "I can prove I'm me. I have my ID. I have my original sketches. I have the terminal receipt proving I was left behind. I have everything right here." Andrew nodded firmly. "I know, and my colleagues know exactly what's happening now too. When we get there, we're going to handle this. But first, you're going to show them your real work." He nodded toward the folder in her lap. Nina looked down at it. 12 pages, 12 midnight sessions at the kitchen table under a cheap lamp while Robert snored on the couch. 12 secret hours, where she actually felt alive. "Will you show them to me?" Andrew asked softly. Nina slipped off the rubber band and opened the flap. First page, the backyard with the clotheslines. Second page, the rusty fire escape of a brick building, with a single beam of sunlight cutting through the metal. Third page, the farmer's market. A crate of apples, and the vendor's hands wearing fingerless wool gloves. Fourth page, the cat on the windowsill, backed by a harsh winter night, and a street lamp. Andrew gently picked up each page by the edges. He studied them in silence, placed them on his tray table, and picked up the next one. Across the aisle, the older woman lowered her knitting needles. She tilted her head, watching quietly. "This is a completely different universe," Andrew said, reaching the final sketch. "Completely different. I totally see why your application was fast-tracked. It's all right here. The line work, the perspective. You don't just draw pretty things, Nina. You draw the truth. The committee is going to lose their minds over this." Nina carefully packed the pages away. Outside, the rain was coming down harder. The drops dragged diagonally across the glass. The bus slowed down through a small town, stopped at a red light, and kept going. "For 15 years, I was told this was worthless garbage," Nina said. She didn't look at Andrew. She said it to the wet window, to the rain, to the dark trees blurring past. Andrew didn't respond. He didn't offer empty comforts. He didn't say, "You're so talented," or "Everything will be okay." He just sat across the aisle in absolute silence. And that silence was better than any words. There was no pity in it. No pressure. No attempt to manipulate her. They were still 3 hours away from the city. Nina tucked her portfolio safely into her bag in the overhead bin. For the first time all day, she let out a long, deep breath. It felt like she had been suffocating since 500 a.m. The city welcomed them with wet sidewalks and the smell of damp earth. The rain had stopped 20 minutes before they pulled in, but puddles still lined the curbs, reflecting the warm glow of street lamps. Even in the late afternoon light, the terminal was small and quiet. A few covered platforms, a red brick station house, and a clock tower displaying the wrong time. Andrew stepped off first and waited for Nina on the pavement. She stepped down, gripped her suitcase handle, and looked around. It was an unfamiliar place, peaceful. Low rooftops and wide streets with hardly any traffic. The air felt completely different from back home. It smelled like wet pine and a nearby river. "The center is close," Andrew said, adjusting his backpack. "About a 15-minute walk. Or we can grab a cab." "Let's walk," Nina said. She desperately needed to move. She couldn't sit for another second. They walked down a street lined with restored historic homes, passing gardens overflowing with hydrangeas and fresh mint. Somewhere a dog was barking. From a second-floor window, a radio murmured the evening weather forecast. Nina dragged her suitcase over the wet asphalt, the wheels clicking steadily over the brick seams. Andrew didn't rush her, and he didn't try to fill the silence with small talk. Only once. At a crossing. Did he say? Right here. Through the courtyard. Nina nodded. The art center was located in an old, grand brick house from the turn of the century. It had been beautifully restored, with massive tall windows and thick oak doors with iron handles. A sleek metal plaque by the entrance displayed the residency's name and logo. In the courtyard, there were wooden benches and a long work table under a canvas awning. Smelling faintly of coffee and oil paint, Andrew held the door, letting Nina step inside first. The interior was stunning. High ceilings, bright white walls, and wide plank hardwood floors sealed with a matte finish. Up and down the main hallway, artwork from previous residents hung on display: charcoal sketches, watercolors, and oil studies. Nina instinctively slowed down. One piece caught her eye, an ink drawing of an old staircase with a crack in the wall letting in a sliver of light. She found herself mentally critiquing it. I would have given the crack more breathing room. I dropped the heavy shadowing on the left. Then she snapped back to reality. She wasn't here as a tourist. She was here because someone was actively trying to steal her future. At the end of the hall was a glass door labeled Administration. Andrew knocked once and pushed it open without waiting. Behind a large desk sat a woman in her 50s wearing thin wire-rimmed glasses. Next to her stood a younger guy with a beard, wearing a worn-out sweater. Scattered across the desk were paperwork and an open laptop. Carol. Charlie. Andrew said, "This is Nina, the real Nina Anderson. I called you from the bus." Carol looked up, peering over her glasses at Nina for a long, uncomfortable moment. She stared with the intense focus of someone who already knows the secret but wants to verify it with her own eyes. "Have a seat," Carol said. Pointing to a chair, Nina sat down. She placed her suitcase beside her and kept the portfolio strictly on her lap. Charlie handed her a glass of water. She didn't drink it, but gave him a grateful nod. "We've been looking into this," Carol started. "After Andrew's call, we pulled the security footage. We have cameras at the main entrance and along this hallway." "Charlie, show her." Charlie turned the laptop screen toward Nina. On the video, a woman walked up to the front doors. She was short, wearing a dark trench coat and a crossbody bag. The resolution wasn't perfect, but her build, posture, and approximate age were a decent match. She walked in with confidence, like someone who belonged there. The next clip showed the reception desk. The woman was holding up her phone, talking to Charlie. "She got here this morning," Charlie explained. "She introduced herself as Nina Anderson and showed me the digital invite email on her screen. I asked for her ID, and she gave me a whole story about leaving her wallet at home by accident. I didn't push it. We aren't airport security. People travel a long way to get here. Mistakes happen." The name matched. The email was real. "And what exactly did she bring as a portfolio?" Andrew asked. Charlie reached under the desk, pulled out a cheap plastic folder, and dropped it on the table. Nina stared at it. Inside were 4 drawings printed on standard copy paper: a vase of generic flowers, a boring lake landscape, a bowl of fruit, and some soulless abstract shapes. They looked like stock images you'd buy at a corporate office supply store. They were painfully clean, sterile, and entirely devoid of life. "When I saw this," Charlie continued, "I was honestly shocked. The pieces submitted online were brilliant. I actually questioned her about it. She claimed she had attached the wrong files to her application, said those sketches belonged to her friend, and that these were her real pieces. And then," Nina asked. "And then she said she wanted to withdraw." Carol chimed in. "She fed us a sob story about family issues. Said she changed her mind and didn't want to take up a spot someone else deserved. She asked for our official withdrawal paperwork." Carol opened a thick manila folder on her desk and slid a single sheet of paper toward Nina. It was a standard, printed legal form. At the very bottom was a signature. Nina leaned forward. The signature looked exactly like hers. Whoever did this had clearly studied her handwriting. The loops were right. The slant was practically perfect. Even the tiny flick at the end of the capital N was in the correct spot. But Nina saw the flaw instantly. "That's not my signature," she said calmly. Carol raised an eyebrow. Nina reached into her purse, pulled out her driver's license, and placed it right next to the forged document. "Look at the pen pressure," Nina said. "I always sign with a heavy hand at the beginning, and I trail off at the end. My last few letters are barely ghosts on the paper. I barely graze the page. I've signed my name like that since college. You can see it clearly on a physical document, but you can't see pen pressure on a digital photograph." She pointed to the forgery. "Look at this ink. The pressure is perfectly even from the first letter to the last. Whoever signed this was copying a flat image off a screen. They didn't know how my hand actually moves across the paper." Charlie and Carol exchanged a heavy look. Andrew stood by the window, arms crossed, watching in silence. "Nina," Carol said, leaning forward, "we need to contact this woman. We have a phone number written down in the visitor log. We're going to call her back and tell her there's a discrepancy with her paperwork that needs to be resolved in person." "Will she actually come back?" "If she doesn't, we still have the camera footage, the fraudulent timestamps from your bus ticket, and you sitting right here with a government ID and the original artwork. That's more than enough to terminate the withdrawal." Charlie picked up the desk phone and dialed, putting it on speaker. The conversation was brief. Charlie kept his voice casual. He apologized for the inconvenience, claimed there was a minor clerical error with the withdrawal form, and politely asked her to return to the office to initial a correction. Through the faint static of the speakerphone, Nina heard hesitation. Then, reluctant agreement. They waited for almost an hour. Nina sat alone in the resident lounge. It was a cozy room with a plush sofa, a bookshelf stuffed with art history texts, and a window overlooking the courtyard. Someone had left a ceramic mug on a table with a sticky note reading, "Do not touch." Nina absent-mindedly flipped through a gallery catalog from the previous year. But she wasn't seeing the pictures. She was thinking about Robert. Right now, he was probably sitting on his couch, staring at his phone, waiting for her to call, crying, waiting for his broken wife to come crawling home, filled with guilt. Never, speaking of the art residency ever again. If she ever dared to call the center to ask what happened, they would have told her she showed up and quit, and Nina would have genuinely believed she was losing her mind. She would think she had hallucinated the entire morning. Robert would wrap his arms around her, kiss her forehead, and say, "Say, baby, I told you this art stuff was just stressing you out." And life would snap right back into place. 15 more years of cooking dinner, watching him sleep on the couch, and hiding her beautiful work on top of a dusty closet. 50 minutes later, the front door chimed. Nina heard footsteps in the hall. She heard Charlie say, "Thanks for coming back. Right this way." Carol had asked Nina to wait in the lounge. They wanted to speak to the woman first. Through the thick walls, Nina heard muffled, anxious voices. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was frantic. 10 minutes later, Charlie pushed open the lounge door. "Nina, you can come in now." Nina stood up, walked down the hall, and entered the office. The woman was sitting stiffly in a chair against the wall. Her back was rigid. Her hands were tightly clasped in her lap. She looked to be in her early 40s, with brown hair pulled back into a messy ponytail. She wore zero makeup, and her face was deathly pale. When Nina walked in, the woman snapped her eyes up, then immediately stared down at the floor. "Sylvia," Carol said, her voice dripping with ice, "I'd like you to meet Nina, the real Nina Anderson. On this desk, we have her state ID, the original artwork submitted in the application, and a printed receipt from the bus terminal, proving that she was blocked from boarding because you scanned her ticket. Sylvia squeezed her fingers together until her knuckles turned white. She looked at the documents. She looked at Nina. She looked at Andrew guarding the door. Her lips trembled. It was a mistake. I was just stop. Andrew cut in, his voice hard. We have security footage of you walking into this building, claiming to be Nina. We have the digital logs from the transit authority proving you stole her seat. We have a forged legal document with a fake signature. And we have the actual victim standing 3 feet away from you. You can tell us the exact truth right now. Or I'm calling the police and handing over all this evidence for identity theft and fraud. The room fell dead silent. Sylvia held her breath for a long 30 seconds. Then, her shoulders slumped. She let out a ragged exhale. Like a drowning swimmer finally hitting the surface. Robert put me up to this, she whispered. Robert, her husband. My name is Sylvia. He called me 3 days ago begging for help. He told me his wife was going through a severe mental breakdown. He said she was obsessing over this trip, that it was tearing their family apart, and that she refused to listen to reason. He said he was just trying to protect her. Sylvia wiped a tear from her cheek. He asked me to travel here in her place, show some terrible artwork, and sign a withdrawal form. He said if the committee thought she was a hack, they'd never invite her back, and she could finally heal at home. Did he pay you to do this? Carol asked sharply. Sylvia nodded, keeping her eyes glued to her shoes. He promised me a lot of money, said he'd wire it tomorrow. He emailed me her QR code, the digital invite, and all the fake artwork. He gave me a script, what to say, how to act, how to explain the withdrawal. And the forgery, Andrew demanded. He texted me a photo of her signature, told me to practice it on scrap paper. I swear to God, I thought I was doing a good thing. The way he talked about it, he made it sound like he was saving her life, like she would thank me later. Silence blanketed the room again. Nina leaned against the doorframe. Crossing her arms, she stared at Sylvia. Strangely, she didn't feel an ounce of rage toward this woman. Oh. The anger was there burning hot, but it wasn't meant for Sylvia. Sylvia was just a convenient, disposable tool, exactly what Robert had turned Nina into for the last 15 years. Sylvia, Nina said smoothly, how long have you and Robert known each other? Sylvia looked up, surprised by the calm tone. About 5 years. We used to work together. I was an account manager at an advertising agency. He brought us freelance contracts. What kind of contracts? A heavy pause. Sylvia licked her dry lips. Various things. Commercial posters, ad banners, catalog covers. He brought in the concept art. He brought in sketches. Nina corrected her. Sylvia didn't answer, but she looked away and squeezed her hands together again. Nina knew she hit the bullseye. Sylvia, Nina repeated. He brought you my sketches. He told us it was a family business. Sylvia blurted out. He said you drew them together, that it was a joint creative project, and he just handled the commercial side. Why would I verify that? It sounded completely normal. Husband and wife side hustle. Andrew slowly sat on the edge of the desk. Carol took off her wire-rimmed glasses and placed them flat on the table. How many times? Nina asked. A lot. Maybe 6 or 7 major campaigns. He would bring in high-res scans. I'd pass them to our graphic designers, and they'd adapt them for commercial formats. We sold them as boutique wall art and high-end brochure illustrations. Robert collected the checks. Nina closed her eyes. Every single missing piece of the puzzle suddenly locked into place. The sketch of the old woman with the herbs she had found in his email 3 years ago. Robert's sudden, unexplained purchases, a new smartphone, an expensive jacket, weekend fishing trips with the guys. He always claimed they were corporate bonuses. And his constant, suffocating mantra, you don't need this art stuff, Nina. It's worthless. He didn't say that because he thought she was bad. He said it because he was terrified she would show her work to a professional. If Nina came to this residency, her portfolio would be viewed by dozens of people, gallery owners, curators, other artists. Eventually, someone would have seen one of those commercial posters and recognized her unmistakable style. The questions would start. The paper trail would lead straight to Robert. He wasn't just stopping her from living her life. He was actively profiting off her misery. For years, he hammered it into her brain that her art was garbage. All while he carried that garbage into an advertising agency and cashed heavy checks for it. The more she believed she was a talentless loser, the richer and safer he became. Carol put her glasses back on. She sat up totally straight. "Nina," Carol said with total authority, "the withdrawal document is hereby shredded. It was signed under fraudulent pretenses. We have a confession. As far as this institution is concerned, your spot is secure." She turned to Andrew. "Andrew, take her upstairs. Let the committee see the real artwork." Andrew grabbed Nina's portfolio from the chair near the door. "Let's go," he said. "They're waiting." The selection committee was meeting in a large, airy loft on the second floor. Rain tapped lightly against a massive skylight. At a long oak table sat an older gentleman with a gray beard and a younger woman in a dark dress with a short haircut. Carol came up a few minutes later and joined them. Scattered across the table were the portfolios of the other candidates. Andrew laid Nina's folder gently in the center. Nina stood with her back against the brick wall. She watched as they opened it. They examined every single page. They passed the watercolor sheets back and forth. They leaned in close to check the graphite shading. The older man with the beard stared at the drawing of the staircase for a very long time, tracing the beam of sunlight with his eyes. The woman in the dark dress picked up the farmer's market sketch and held it up to the natural light from the window. Nobody said, "Oh, how pretty." Nobody threw out exaggerated compliments. They just looked, really looked. And for the first time in 15 years, Nina saw it in their eyes. Her work deserved to be seen. The bearded man finally looked up, locked eyes with Nina, and smiled. "Welcome to the residency," he said. Nina nodded. Her throat was completely tight. She couldn't speak. So she just nodded again. And that was enough. That evening, once all the paperwork was sorted out, Andrew helped her carry her suitcase up to her room on the second floor. It was small and perfect. A twin bed, a writing desk, a chair, and a bookshelf. Sitting on the desk was a small lamp, almost identical to the one in her kitchen back home. Nina left her suitcase by the bed, placed her portfolio on the desk, and sat down. Her window overlooked the courtyard, the wet rooftops of neighboring houses, and a sliver of the dark river in the distance. Andrew leaned against the doorframe. "Nina, everything we collected today, the terminal receipt, the camera footage, the forged document, Sylvia's confession. If you want, we can organize all of it and hand it straight to a lawyer." "I do want that," Nina said without a second of hesitation. Andrew nodded. "I know a great attorney here in town. If you're up for it, I can introduce you tomorrow morning. She handles cases exactly like this." "Like what?" Andrew paused, choosing his words carefully. "Cases where a parasite feeds off someone else's life for years, while making the host believe they're the one who needs saving." Nina looked at him. Then she looked at the desk lamp, then at the window, where the sky was turning a deep, bruised purple. "Thank you, Andrew, for everything." He gave her a warm smile and gently pulled the door shut behind him. Nina was finally alone. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. 14 missed calls from Robert. 8 text messages. "Where are you?" "Nina. Pick up the phone right now. Call me. We need to talk. I'm getting really worried." The texts escalated in fake panic. The final message had come in 30 minutes ago. "Nina, if you don't call me back in 5 minutes, I am driving out there myself." Nina placed the phone face down on the desk. She turned on the little lamp. She pulled a blank sheet of paper from her folder, picked up a pencil, and started to draw. She drew the ticket counter, The agent with the beaded glasses, the empty terminal gates, and the heavy buses fading into the rain. Robert actually showed up the next day. Nina found out when Charlie poked his head into the studio. Nina had her sketches spread out over a drafting table. "Hey, Nina," Charlie said cautiously. "There's a guy downstairs who says he's your husband. I didn't let him pass the gate." Nina stopped drawing. She looked down at her hands. Her fingers were coated in graphite dust. There was a faint red mark on her wrist from where she usually kept her rubber band. "Tell him to wait in the courtyard," she said. "I'll be right down." She walked outside 5 minutes later. The sky was clear, and the air smelled like wet pine. Robert was standing by the long wooden table under the awning. He was dressed sharply, freshly shaved. In his right hand, he held a massive bouquet of white roses. Sitting on the bench next to him was a paper gift bag from a bakery. The second he saw Nina, he took a step forward, holding out the flowers. "Babe. Thank God. I didn't sleep a wink last night. You wouldn't answer the phone. I was losing my mind." Nina didn't take the flowers. She stopped a few feet away from him. Keeping her distance, Robert slowly lowered his arm. But he didn't hide the bouquet. He held it at waist height, like a peace offering waiting to be accepted. "Nina, I know you're mad. I totally get it. But I drove hours to get here because you are the most important thing in my life. I was terrified. Terrified that you would leave and never come back. I made a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes, but I'm here because I love you." His voice was smooth, gentle, slightly raspy, perfectly playing the part of a man who just survived a sleepless, agonizing night. Nina knew this exact tone by heart. He used it after every fight, after every insult, after every time she packed a bag. He hit play on the recording, using the exact same pauses, the exact same head tilt, the exact same words. "Robert," Nina said, her voice ice cold. "You sent Sylvia to board my bus. She came here, used my name, showed fake artwork, and forged my signature on a legal withdrawal document. You stole my QR code from my private email. You gave her a script, and you paid her off." She confessed to everything. "There are security cameras." "Robert, they have a paper trail." Robert blinked. The bouquet trembled slightly in his grip. He went totally silent for 1 second. And then he smiled. It was a tired, sad smile. The smile of a man who was being deeply, unfairly misunderstood. "Nina. Baby. Listen to me," he said softly. "Yes, I asked Sylvia to do that. But I didn't do it to hurt you. I was trying to protect you. You're not ready for this environment. You know your drawings are just a hobby. I couldn't bear the thought of you coming all the way out here just to be humiliated by these snobs. If they told you your work was bad, it would have destroyed you. I know you better than you know yourself." "They accepted my work," Nina said flatly. "The committee reviewed my original sketches last night. I'm officially a resident here." Silence. Robert awkwardly shifted the flowers from his right hand to his left. His smile didn't vanish, but it thinned out, like a crack spreading across a windshield. "Well, then, say, I was just overreacting." He chuckled nervously. "That's amazing news. Let's just forget all this crazy stuff happened. I drove all the way here to be with you. Let's go out and celebrate. I'm going to support you 100%. Nina just stared at him. "Nina, why are you looking at me like I'm a stranger?" he pleaded. "Come here. I've been driving for hours because I care about you." "Robert," she said, "I know about the ad agency." He stopped moving entirely, not abruptly. He just froze, like a machine whose gears suddenly jammed. "What? What are you talking about?" "I know about the sketches. My sketches. The ones you took pictures of and brought to Sylvia. The ones her agency turned into commercial posters and brochures. The ones you were cashing checks for. All while telling me my art was worthless garbage." The courtyard was dead quiet. Somewhere over the brick wall, a bicycle rattled past. In the distance, Edo Barkil? Robert lowered the white roses. He placed them on the bench next to the bakery bag. He sat down heavily and rubbed his face with both hands. Nina. It's not what you think. I was trying to help you. I thought, if I could just prove that your art was commercially viable, I could surprise you with the money later. I wanted to show you it was possible. You would have been so happy. It's been 5 years. Robert, when exactly was the surprise party? The timing was never right. Nina shook her head. Not out of anger. Out of pure exhaustion. Every single word out of his mouth was just another brick in a wall of lies. Protect. Surprise. Timing. Every time he got caught, he just spun the story until she was the crazy one. And he was the tragic, misunderstood husband. Robert reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small velvet box. The exact same box. Nina recognized the worn-out corners of the dark blue fabric immediately. 3 years ago, he had been on his knees in her friend's hallway, holding this box. With wet eyes, begging, "Marry me again." And Nina had caved. Because strangers were watching, Robert opened the box. Inside sat a thin gold band with a tiny diamond. Nina. I screwed up. I know I did. But give me one last chance. I will fix everything. We can start completely over. You draw. And I'll support you. I'll never interfere again. I swear to God. He held the box out to her. His face was dead serious. His eyes were shining with fake tears. It was the exact same performance. The same script. The same props. The same actor who refused to learn a new role. Nina looked at the ring. She looked at Robert. Then she looked around the courtyard. The wooden benches. The canvas awning. The blooming hydrangeas. She looked up at the second floor, where her studio window sat open. Her drafting table waiting in the sunlight. 3 years ago. She couldn't say no because people were watching. But today, in this quiet courtyard, it was just the two of them. And in that silence, everything became incredibly simple. Nina slowly raised her left hand. She slid her gold wedding band off her ring finger. It was slightly scratched from 15 years of wear. She placed it inside the velvet box. Right next to the other ring, she snapped the lid shut and gently placed the box into Robert's palm. I'm not coming back. Robert. His expression instantly shattered. It didn't happen slowly. First, his lips twitched. Then, his eyes narrowed. The soft, loving mask melted away in a split second, revealing the ugly truth underneath. Are you out of your mind? He spat, his voice dropping into a vicious sneer. You seriously think you can survive without me? Out here in the middle of nowhere, playing with your little watercolors. You are nothing without me. Nina, you have never been anything. I carried you for 15 years. Nina listened to him scream, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel that familiar punch in her gut. She didn't feel the guilt pulling her down. She just saw him for exactly what he was. His tears never meant he was sad. They meant he was losing control. And his rage only appeared when the tears stopped working. It was never love. It was just a control panel. And he was flipping switches to make her move. But the power was completely cut. Nina turned around and walked toward the heavy oak doors. Robert was still screaming something behind her. But the words were just static. She walked into the building, climbed the wooden stairs, entered her studio, and locked the door behind her. Through the window, she watched Robert standing in the courtyard, gripping the velvet box. He kicked a bench. He snatched up the white roses and the bakery bag, and stormed out through the iron gates. She watched the white petals disappear down the street until he was completely gone. Nina sat down at her desk, turned on her lamp, and placed a fresh, blank sheet of paper in front of her. A week later, everything was sitting on a lawyer's desk. The bus terminal receipt, the security footage, the forged document, Sylvia's recorded statement, and the financial records of the ad agency payouts. Nina signed the divorce papers in that lawyer's office, on the second floor of an old building that smelled like coffee and old paper. She signed it in one fluid motion. And, just like always, her pen barely grazed the paper on the final letter. For the next 3 months, Nina lived at the residency. She woke up early, drank coffee at the long wooden table in the courtyard, and painted in her studio until the sun went down. She worked with graphite and watercolors, and even started experimenting with heavy oils. Her room constantly smelled of turpentine and cedar. Outside her window, the seasons changed. Summer faded into autumn. The leaves turned gold and blue across the courtyard pavement. She painted the bus terminal, over and over again, from different angles and in different lighting. The ticket counter with the older agent behind the glass, the empty departure lanes in the rain, the glowing digital board, the woman standing on the edge of the curb with a suitcase, the forgotten coffee cup on a metal bench. Every single piece was about the exact same thing, that terrifying split second where a person has to choose between staying and walking away. Andrew would often stop by the studio. He'd bring her coffee, sit in the corner chair, and watch her work in comfortable silence. They talked during the communal dinners that the residents took turns cooking. Nina made her grandmother's famous chili, and Charlie went back for thirds every single time. Andrew told wild stories about crazy gallery owners and chaotic exhibition openings. Nina listened, and sometimes she laughed, and every time she did, the sound surprised her, as if she were hearing her own voice for the very first time. Andrew never told her she was a genius. He didn't smother her with praise, and he never tried to save her. He was just there, a person who genuinely liked watching her create, asking for absolutely nothing in return. And Nina finally realized that Andrew wasn't her savior. Her real savior was her own decision. The choice to walk away, the choice to stop waiting for Robert to change, the choice to stop confusing control with love. The residency's autumn exhibition opened on a Saturday night. Outside the tall studio windows, a freezing rain was falling. The main gallery was packed, locals from the town, artists from neighboring cities, and gallery curators who drove up from the capital. The artwork was mounted on the stark white walls, illuminated perfectly by gallery spotlights. Nina stood quietly near her section, watching strangers stop in front of her paintings. Some leaned in to inspect the brushstrokes. Others stepped back to take in the full scene. An older woman in a blue cardigan stood in front of the watercolor of the bus terminal for a very long time. She finally turned to her husband and whispered, "I feel like I'm standing right there." The centerpiece of Nina's collection was hanging squarely in the middle of the wall. It was a massive piece, heavy graphite and aggressive watercolor. It depicted the glass window of a bus terminal ticket counter, with the blurry silhouette of an agent sitting behind it, standing in front of the glass. With her back to the viewer was a woman holding a cardboard portfolio. She wasn't walking toward the glass, and she wasn't walking away. She was perfectly still. But the posture, the tension in the lines, it made you realize that in exactly 1 second, she was going to turn around. Not toward the ticket counter, but toward the open terminal doors. Beneath the painting was a small white gallery tag with the title "Boarding Confirmed." The people drinking wine and reading the tag thought it was a painting about catching a bus, about leaving town, but Nina stood in the corner, knowing exactly what it meant. It was about the day a man tried to steal her life. He put an actor in her seat, tried to force her to sign away her own future, and almost got away with it. Almost, because she just bought a new ticket. And this time, she boarded alone. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave a like. It's a simple gesture for you, but it makes all the difference for us.